From whispered hauntings to bone-chilling encounters, these are the stories that refuse to be buried. Prepare yourselves, for we tread on the precipice of nightmares, where reality bends and the unseen takes form. Subscribe if you dare. Paranoia. Posted by Case by Case. I'll be back before you know it. That's what Ryan said before he left. He'd gotten a frantic phone call. Jack, Ryan's younger brother, had broken his leg at soccer practice. It sounded pretty bad. They were worried the break wouldn't heal correctly, and Jack wouldn't be able to walk on it again. Go, I told Ryan. Be with your brother. What about you? We'd driven for days and were far from home. I didn't relish the thought of traveling all the way back, plus we'd left our loved ones behind to keep them safe. It would be dangerous for me to return. I'll stay here, it'll only be for a few days, right? I knew that was best, but I expected Ryan to put up a fight. He wouldn't want to leave me alone. He'd want to be by my side, to protect me. I'd have to convince him to leave, prove that I could handle being on my own for a few days. Instead, he said, "That's perfect. Thanks, Case, I knew you'd understand." He kissed my forehead and began to throw his things into a bag. That stung a bit. He's worried about his brother, I told myself. Of course he doesn't want Jack mixed up in this. Even so, my face burned, and I turned away before Ryan could see that I was upset. Quickly, too quickly, Ryan had booked a last-minute flight home, drove to the nearest airport, and was gone. I was alone. Our motel was on the outskirts of a small, quiet town. The air outside was hot and stagnant, like stale breath. It was one of those mundane, interchangeable towns you find in every state. A couple gas stations, one main street with a few shops or delis, and maybe a school or a library. Nothing special. So why did it give me the creeps? Maybe it was because I'd see the same cars pass by on the street, over and over again. Maybe it was the way people would invariably turn their heads in my direction as they walked by. Or it could be the way the sun never peeked out from the clouds, leaving everything in a shadowless, dim haze. All I knew is that ever since Ryan left, I felt uneasy, like something sinister was lurking just around the corner. I'd felt safer when we were on the road, moving constantly, outrunning whatever dangers were on our trail. Now I felt like I was just waiting for them all to catch up to me. That thought was cemented in the back of my mind, and I just couldn't shake it. It was eating away at me, making me paranoid, seeing things out of the corner of my eye. That's why I can't be sure if I was dreaming last night, when I opened my eyes and stared up into a dozen shadowed faces, looming over my bed and staring down at me. It was pitch black at first, but as my eyes adjusted, I could see the figures standing over me. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't be screamed if I tried. But I didn't try. The next thing I knew, it was daytime, and I was lying in my bed in an empty room. I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, until I stepped out of bed and looked down. I'd poured salt around the bed as a precaution. There was just enough to form a tight circle. Last I'd checked, the salt was undisturbed. But looking now, I saw indents around the entire perimeter of the salt barrier. Tiny little semicircles. It looked like a line of bare feet had encroached on the salt circle, the toes just hitting the line, pushing the salt closer and closer. I shuddered and hopped out of bed, my feet treading right through the salt. It spread across the carpet, leaving my feet gritty and raw as I checked the room. The front door was closed, well, as closed as I would allow it. The chain was still drawn, but I'd left the door cracked open, with a pencil jammed in the gap to keep it from shutting completely. The window was shut but not latched, I noticed. I locked it, and pushed the whole incident from my mind. I was out of salt, however, so I needed to walk down the block to the grocery store. I should get food too. I tried to remember the last time I'd eaten. I couldn't even remember having any meals the day before. It wasn't a far walk to the grocery store, which was lucky because my car was still at the airport, waiting for Ryan to return. I wish I had some of Pepper's salt gel, I thought, and I made a mental note to ask her to send me a bottle. I passed by a car in the grocery store parking lot and did a double take. I could have sworn I'd seen that same car parked outside the motel the other day, and circling the street even before that. No, wait, the windows look a little different. It couldn't be the same car, but I still felt uneasy. I bit my lip, a habit I'd picked up when I got stressed, and felt a sharp pain. I put my fingers to my lip and drew them away. Blood. I must have been more stressed out than I thought these past few days. Inside the store, I grabbed a basket and walked down the aisles until I found the salt. I dumped an armful of containers into my basket and rounded the corner into the next aisle. There were crackers and biscuits. I didn't feel hungry, but I grabbed a box of wheat crackers and continued on. Maybe I'd get peanut butter or cheese to put on the crackers. The store was almost empty, save for a couple other customers. I wandered past a boy and gave him a polite smile. He was taller than I, but looked younger. His hair was the palest, thinnest blonde, making his eyebrows and eyelashes look almost non-existent. He met my eyes and gave me a small smile back. I meandered around the store some more in search of peanut butter, but was still empty-handed about 10 minutes later. I passed the boy again, and on second thought turned back around. "You wouldn't happen to know where the peanut butter is, would you?" I said in my friendliest manner. I don't work here," he said shyly. "No, I know that. I was just wondering if you knew." I grinned sheepishly, hoping I hadn't embarrassed the poor kid. "Oh, sure. Yeah, just follow me." He led me down an aisle and pointed to a high shelf. "Oh, I have no idea how I missed that. I must have walked by here a dozen times." "Which one did you want?" I pointed, and the boy reached up and grabbed the jar for me. Chunky, all natural. Exactly what I wanted. "Thank you." I gave him a winning smile. "No problem, Case." I froze, and so did he. The grin remained plastered on my face. "No problem, Casey," he was going to say. How did he know my name? The boy didn't take his eyes off my face, but crept slowly backwards. A slight, sinister smile played on his lips before he darted around the corner and out of sight. I heard the tinkling of bells as he ran out the front door. Finally, I could breathe again. I gasped and slid down to the floor, knocking some jars off the shelves. This was too much. I needed Ryan or someone. I couldn't do this alone anymore. I pulled out my phone and dialed my boyfriend. After a few rings, it went to his voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I was about to dial Pepper, but it really wasn't her voice I wanted to hear. I typed out a text instead and sent it to Pepper. "Weird things are happening. What do you know about town name?" No immediate response, so I pulled myself up off the ground. No one had noticed my breakdown in the nearly empty store. The cashier rang up my purchases: crackers, peanut butter, and 6 containers of salt. She looked at me. "Your lip's bleeding." I made it back to the motel and shut myself inside. "Stop freaking out," I ordered myself. I went into the bathroom to splash water on my face, hoping it would distract me from my unease. I glanced in the mirror as the water was running and saw my lip, a thin trail of blood leading all the way to my chin. I either needed to stop chewing on my lip when I was distraught, or just learn to calm the heck down. I ducked my head down into the sink, caught some water in my hands, and splashed it into my face. It felt nice and refreshing. I looked back up into the mirror, dismayed to see red still on my lips. I wiped my hand across my mouth, clearing most of the blood away, but a stubborn trickle remained. I wiped harder, and to my horror, my bottom lip ripped clean away, revealing my bloodied lower teeth. I heard a splat as the pink flesh fell into the sink. I let out an ear-piercing shriek and jumped backwards, knocking into the shower curtain and almost tearing it down. I was about to turn and run from the room, but I caught one more glance at myself in the mirror. My eyes were wide with shock and my face was deathly white, but my lips, they were fine. The bottom one still had a small cut, but it was otherwise intact. I looked into the sink, saw only clear water running over white porcelain. I took deep, gasping breaths and steadied myself on the sink. I must be seeing things. It was ages before I could move again. I stared at the mirror, watching for anything strange, but I only saw my own terrified face staring back. My imagination was working overtime, however. My reflection just blinked, but I didn't blink, did I? I finally shook my head. I'm just being paranoid, letting everything get to me. When I went back into the room, I looked at the salt circle again. This time, however, I didn't see the imprints of bare toes around the edge. Sure, there were a few places where it had been disturbed, but that was probably from when I'd been scrambling around the room. I really am going crazy, I thought. Given my history, crazy seemed like a much better alternative than something supernatural. I even found myself hoping that was the case. My phone buzzed. Ryan's calling. I picked it up and my heart sank to hear his familiar "Hello?" "Hi," I happily replied. "Sorry I missed your call earlier. How is everything?" "Fine," I lied. "How's Jack?" He'll pull through. He's just bummed he has to miss the rest of the season. Poor kid." "Yeah. Anyway, I'm headed back now. I'll probably get in really late tonight." "Will you be up?" "Yes. I'll be up." "Cool. I'm worried we'll be delayed cause of weather here though, so if I'm really late, don't wait up, okay?" "Okay." "Case?" He sounded concerned. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine, I just miss you. It's weird here. I don't like this place." "It's just one more night. I'll see you soon. Love you." I needed to kill time, so I got out my computer and started to write. About Ryan leaving, about the weird kid in the grocery store, about everything. Looking back though, not a whole lot did happen. Just me going crazy. I probably won't even post this, but it was a nice distraction. Okay, something weird is happening. It's dark out, and I heard some noises outside. Some strange shuffling. It's probably nothing, but I turned out all the lights in my room just in case. My computer screen seems awfully bright now. The door's barely cracked, but I left the chain latched again. Maybe I should go ahead and close it? The noises are right outside my door though, and I think I just heard a thud. If something is out there, I don't want it to know that I know. I'm going to call Ryan. He should be back by now. Alright, I am seriously creeped out right now. I called Ryan, and I heard his phone ringing right outside my door. But if he's out there, why doesn't he knock? Or answer his phone? This is Ryan. I just drove back to the motel to find Casey, and when I got to the door, something hit me over the head. I must have been knocked out. I woke up and the door to the room was wide open. Casey's gone. Her computer was open, and I saw this post. What the hell is going on? Where is she? I'm not sure what to say. So much has happened, so much has gone wrong. It feels so final putting it into words. Why can't it remain a bad memory, pushed to the back of my mind? But I know it can't. Not while he's here. Let's see, where did I leave off? Oh right, I was cowering in my motel room in the middle of the night, as the strange noises outside grew louder and louder. I could make out definite footsteps now, heavy and deliberate. I finally came to my senses and fumbled with my phone, dialing 911. The door crashed open before I could hit send. I stared up fearfully at the intruders, for, No, 5 strange men entered the room, branching out along the wall, cornering me. I didn't recognize any of them, but they sure recognized me. The closest man, tall and thick, locked eyes with me as he spoke. That's her, that's the beacon. His voice was dry and hollow, and it chilled me right to the bone. It took me a moment to react. I tried to scramble off the bed, but my feet caught on the sheets and I fell hard on the floor, jarring my knee. Grimacing in pain, I kicked at the sheets binding my legs and made a desperate lunge toward the window, away from the men. But I was too late. The nearest man, the same one who'd spoken, caught me around the ankles and dragged me back towards the group. Fight back, I commanded myself. As I was pulled across the floor, carpet scraping my palms and chin raw, I grabbed the lamp cord hanging down from the nightstand. The desk lamp fell to the floor, sending chaotic shadows dancing across the walls. I grabbed hold of the lamp and swung it into the man's head as hard as I could. The bulb shattered and the man cursed, dropping me and clutching his head. I felt a grim satisfaction as I saw a trickle of blood drip down his cheek, but my triumph was short-lived as 2 other men darted forward, pinning me to the ground. No good, I thought. Scream, do something. I opened my mouth and let out a piercing shriek. The men were ready. A scrawny, middle-aged guy grasped my throat tightly. I couldn't breathe. My lungs ached for air as I struggled futilely. Spots of light flashed before my eyes, but before my vision completely faded, the man had stuffed a handful of fabric in my mouth and wrapped a greasy, stained bandana around my head, tying it tightly. He took his hand away, and I could breathe again, but my screams were muffled. The man smiled and said, "That's more like it." The men easily overpowered my struggling, and soon my hands and feet were bound as well. My mind was racing. Ryan will be back any minute. He'll find me. He'll get help. My hopes were dashed as 2 of the men carried me roughly out of the room and I saw what was lying in a crumpled heap outside the front door. Ryan. He was so still, I couldn't be sure if he was alive or dead. The back of his head was dark with matted blood. I fought against my captors, trying to shout through the cloth gag and call out to Ryan, but I was whisked out of sight in seconds. Before I knew it, I was shoved bodily into the trunk of an old sedan. The hatch slammed shut, and I was thrown into complete blackness. I remember the inside of the trunk smelled sour, like old milk. The roar of the engine was deafening, but not enough to drown out the sound of my breathing. My throat ached where the scrawny man had grabbed it. After some time, I grew lightheaded, either from fear or from exhaust fumes seeping into the compartment. Maybe a little bit of both. My head cracked sharply on the cold, bare floor of the trunk as the car raced around corners, down rough gravel roads. After what seemed like a lifetime, it skidded to a stop, and I burrowed as far back as I could, afraid of what I'd see when the hatch opened. I could hear muted voices outside, and then the doors slammed shut, shaking the whole car. The trunk lid flew open, and I peered upwards, blinking frantically. It wasn't much brighter outside than inside, but I could make out the features of a woman staring down at me, her unkempt hair silhouetted in moonlight. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed the clothes she was wearing. It was the dark blue uniform of a police officer. "I'm saved!" My heart soared in relief. The woman frowned. "Are you sure this is her?" "Damn right I'm sure. She's a beacon, there's no doubt about it." My stomach clenched as I recognized the voice of the man who'd first grabbed me. Why is the policewoman so calm? Doesn't she see that they kidnapped me? With growing horror, I realized that she wasn't there to rescue me. She was on their side. "Bring her into the circle," the woman commanded, and soon 3 pairs of hands were lifting me out of the trunk. Strong, deft fingers loosened the knots around my ankles, and I winced as blood rushed painfully back into my feet. As soon as I could stand, I was prodded forward, stumbling over the uneven ground. Finally, I could see my surroundings. We were deep in the woods, and with a glance behind me, I could see the car parked at the end of a narrow, dirt road. The road trailed off into the dark forest. My heart sank as I realized, no one will find me out here. Ahead was a grassy path, and I saw flickering light through the trees, a fire. A few more yards and the woods opened up into a clearing. My stomach dropped as I saw what awaited me. About 20 or so people stood in a circle around the clearing, both men and women. Most looked to be in their 40s or older, but I felt sick as I saw a pair of young kids, no more than 10 years old. How could anyone let their kids be a part of this? To the right of me, a familiar face stood out from crowd. It was the pale blonde boy I'd met at the grocery store just hours earlier. He avoided my accusing gaze. I heard a low murmuring, and I realized the onlookers were chanting, just under their breath. I couldn't make out any of the words, but I knew it was nothing good. A large bonfire blazed at the far end of the meadow. In the center of the clearing, however, was a chair. Just an ordinary, metal, folding chair. The sight of such an everyday object in this bizarre setting frightened me. I knew the chair was meant for me even before they shoved me down onto it, tying my hands firmly around the back of the chair. Around the chair were odd, intersecting lines of dirt, or ash, making a pattern within a large circle. It reminded me of the symbol my Aunt Lydia had drawn months ago, the one that made people vanish from existence. It wasn't the same symbol, I was sure, but the resemblance told me it was from the same, sinister root, witchcraft. I felt sick, and I gritted my teeth through the gag, bracing myself for what would come next. "Prepare her, Taylor," that same man said in his hollow voice. The blond boy stepped into the circle and reached towards my face. I jerked away, but he grabbed the bandana from around my head and pulled it down. He didn't meet my eyes as he pulled the gag from my mouth and placed it in a burlap bag at his feet. I could talk now, so I pleaded with him. "Taylor," I begged. "Whatever's going on here, you don't need to be a part of this." The tall man had begun speaking. "On this night we gather to witness the birth and death of our Lord." "Please, Taylor, I know you don't want to do this," I said earnestly. "On this same day, so many years ago, our ancestors brought our Lord into this world." Taylor produced a thick, long rope from the burlap bag. He grabbed it by one extremely frayed end and raised it towards my neck. No, 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 I thought. My breathing grew rough and panicky. "Taylor, please." My voice cut off as Taylor tied the unraveled ends of the rope not around my neck, but above my jaw, securing it where the gag had been. A section of rope was lodged in my mouth, my teeth firmly fastened into the fiber. The rope tasted odd, and I realized the whole thing was soaked in some kind of liquid. It was oily and ran down my throat, making me cough. "We prepare the new vessel," the man gestured to me, "and bid farewell to the old." As he said that, I saw a few new people enter the clearing, carrying something large between them. As they neared the circle, I saw what it was. A frail, old man sat in a chair identical to mine, bound just as tightly as I was. They set him down facing me, just out of the circle of ash. I gazed at the old man, expecting to see a hint of sympathy, as he seemed to be in the same situation as I. Instead, he stared back with a fierce, furious look. His cold eyes flashed with anger. I was taken aback. That raw, brutal emotion didn't seem to belong on the body of that old man. It was like something else, something darker, was staring out from the old man's visage. My struggles were momentarily halted by this distraction, and I could only watch as Taylor took the other end of the rope and tied it around the old man's head in a similar fashion to mine, securing the rope in the old man's mouth. I noticed how Taylor's fingers shook as he accidentally brushed the man's bare skin with his own. The old man's livid stare never broke from mine. I took a few seconds to weigh my predicament. In the center of a clearing, deep in the woods, amid an insane cult gathering, I sat bound to a chair. Facing a strange old man, one rope connecting the two of us, from one mouth to the other, and no one knew where I was. I'm not getting out of this one, I thought in despair. The tall man hadn't stopped speaking during all of this. For 71 years, his worship has lived in this vessel, but its time has come. He drew a glinting dagger from his waistband. My heart thudded as if it would burst from my chest, and I dug my heels into the dirt, straining against my bindings. He approached the old man and in a swift, fluid motion, drew the blade across the old man's neck. The old man's head tilted back, and I saw a sheet of red spill from the gaping wound. I gasped, choking on the rope clenched between my teeth. With one last shuddering breath, the man was dead. That ferocious look had faded from the old man's face. He was now just a withered wisp of a person. An empty shell. As I stared at his vacant expression, I noticed something strange. The end of the rope that was still secured in his mouth was darkening. I thought it might be blood soaking into the rope, but soon I could tell it wasn't red at all. It was as black as pitch, as if an inky substance was slowly spreading through the rope, seeping into the oil-soaked fiber, making its way down the rope, towards me. The monotonous chanting of the spectators now gave way to hushed, marveled whispers. And now it is time for us to welcome the seventh incarnation of our... The tall man was cut short by a terrible noise, the screech of rending metal. I craned my neck trying to see over my shoulder, and saw the bouncing headlights of an approaching car. People dove into the trees as the car sped into the clearing, dirt flying as it came to a skidding halt. I stared in wonder at the car. It was mine. Ryan flew out of the back seat, followed closely by Calvin and Pepper from the front. I saw a massive scrape along the front passenger door of the car and recalled the crash we'd just heard. They must have plowed right by the car I'd arrived in, that had been blocking the end of the dirt road. That would explain the loud noise we just heard. They're here. They've come for me. I don't think I'd ever felt happier, more relieved, in my whole life. Ryan sprinted towards me at full speed, knocking a couple of onlookers out of the way in the process. He knelt by my side, and without even a greeting, began to work at the knots holding me to the chair. I stole a glance at Calvin and saw the silver glint of a handgun grasped in his fist. Guns normally made me uncomfortable, but this seemed to be keeping the crazies from coming any closer, and I was more than okay with that. A few of them had disappeared into the woods, but a couple hung back by the tree line, unsure of what to do. I saw that both the tall man and Taylor were among the stragglers. Pepper too held a gun, I noticed, and was helping Calvin clear the area. As I turned back to Ryan, my eyes passed over the rope again. The blackness had covered more than half of the length of the rope. In just minutes, it would reach my lips, and I didn't want to know what would happen then. Ryan wasn't making much progress on the twine binding my hands and feet, and I began to panic. I started to thrash wildly, and tried to yell through the rope gag. Faster! Ryan was bewildered at my sudden frenzy, and reached up to pull the gag down from my mouth. As soon as I could speak, I said, "The rope. Take it off now. Look at it!" I nodded at the other end of the rope, and saw Ryan's eyes widen in fear as he noticed the darkness spreading from the old man's corpse. Ryan fumbled with the knot, his fingers slipping over the slick, oily threads, but he finally got it undone. He threw it to the ground with the black only inches away from where my mouth had been. As Ryan went back to working on the other knots, finally managing to free my feet, I watched the black continue to soak through to the end of the rope. There was a flurry of movement in the corner of my eye, and I looked up to see the tall man approaching. How did he get past Calvin? Calvin and Pepper weren't even looking in our direction. They were now at the far end of the meadow, and it seemed like they had their own struggles now. The tall man's lip curled in rage, and I barely had time to say, "Ryan, look out!" before the man barreled into him, knocking Ryan back. The man shoved my chair as he passed, and it tipped precariously back on two legs before succumbing to gravity. My head hit the dirt hard and my neck bent sharply, until I swung my legs and tipped the chair one more time so I was lying on my side. As I was now only tied by my wrists around the back of the chair, I realized I could shimmy my way up and free myself from the chair. With my face scraping against the ash and dirt, I did just that. Meanwhile, Ryan was struggling with the tall man, but was holding his own. Even when the man drew his dagger once more, Ryan deftly knocked it from his hand. The dagger sailed through the air before sticking point down in the grass. Near me. I rolled towards the blade, and awkwardly grasped it in my still-tied hands, slicing clumsily through the twine. In seconds I would be free, and Ryan and I would outnumber the man. But at that moment, another figure entered the circle. It was the blond boy, Taylor. The man noticed him, and desperately shouted, "The rope!" Taylor dived at the inky black rope, grasping the frayed end firmly. I worked the dagger faster. I'm so close. The twine finally snapped, and I used my now freed hands to lift me up off the ground. But Taylor was quicker. He'd crossed the distance between us in seconds and reached towards me, rope in hand, to grab my head, and stopped. The rope couldn't go any further. It was still attached to the body of the old man. Taylor was confused. He didn't drop the rope, but he couldn't reach me either. I was just inches from danger, and I marveled at my stroke of luck. "Ryan, come on!" I leapt to my feet and began sprinting across the clearing towards Calvin and Pepper. I saw Ryan shove the man back and start to run. I was so close, to Calvin and Pepper, to my car, to safety. Another crisis averted. That's when I heard the cry. "Casey!" I craned my head back, and saw that Ryan was not behind me. He was still in the circle, both Taylor and the tall man pinning him down. I watched in horror as they pried his mouth open and inserted the blackened rope. "No!" My shout echoed off the trees, and it finally called Calvin and Pepper to our attention. Calvin came sprinting past me, and Pepper limped after him. A loud noise rang out, and I realized Calvin had fired a warning shot into the air. Taylor and the man recoiled, before sprinting off into the trees. I was close enough to see the triumphant smile on the man's face. In a daze, I approached my three companions. Ryan lay still on the ground, and didn't move until Calvin removed the rope from his mouth. Then, he coughed violently, spraying the inky, black substance from his lungs. Calvin and Pepper covered their faces. I could see the blackness around Ryan's lips as I got closer. What had they done to him? Pepper knelt down, clutching her knee. "Are you okay?" I asked her, really wanting to know if Ryan was okay more than anything. I was scared of that answer. "I'm fine," Pepper said dismissively. I took a deep breath. "Is Ryan all right?" Pepper was watching Calvin intently as he leaned over Ryan, studying him. The look on Calvin's face said it all. "No. It's hard for me to write what happened next. I promise I will soon, but I just can't right now. I need some time. It looks just like Ryan. It sounds like Ryan too, and it even has that same boyish smile that I fell in love with. The dark, cropped hair, those clear, blue eyes, that look of his that makes my heart skip a beat. But my fears are confirmed when I ask, 'Ryan, is that you?' No. At least it's honest. Maybe I should back up a bit. In the deep woods, by the light of the dying bonfire, I knelt over my boyfriend. He lay face up on the cold earth. Pepper sat by my side, and Calvin hunched over Ryan, a concerned look on his face. Calvin's knees were planted right on top of a line of ash. He'll ruin his nice suit. I must have been in shock, looking for things to distract me from the situation. My eyes wandered over to the blackened rope, now coiled beside us. I tried not to look at what was tied to the other end. Ryan groaned. Calvin said, "Can you hear me?" "My head hurts." "Ryan, can you hear me?" Calvin said again. "I can't feel my fingers. What's happening to me?" His voice sounded weak and distant. Tears pricked my eyes. "Ryan, Calvin said more forcefully. Tell me if you can hear my voice. Ryan! Yes, I can hear you, Calvin, Ryan snapped, raising his head off the ground and looking Calvin dead in the eyes. I was shocked to hear anger in his voice. After a tense moment, Ryan's head dropped back down into the dirt, and he closed his eyes. What's happening to him? I asked Pepper. She shook her head, watching Calvin intently. Calvin leaned in closer, his expression unreadable in the flickering light of the fire. Ryan, keep talking. Tell me how old you are. No response. Tell me your mother's name. Tell me what school you go to. Ryan didn't answer. Instead he said, It's spreading. Up my arms and my legs. It hurts. Then he paused. Casey? I'm right here, baby, I said, and I reached my hand out to touch him. Pepper held me back. I can see you, he said. His eyes were still closed. I shivered in the chilled night air. Do you know who I am? Calvin said. Calvin, help me, Ryan pleaded. I don't know what's wrong with me. Do you know who I am? Calvin repeated louder. I was confused. Ryan had already said Calvin's name twice. Of course he recognized Calvin. But when Ryan responded, it was in that same, angry tone he'd used earlier. I know who you are, Calvin. Then you must know what I am capable of. Calvin's voice was low and silky. He sounded dangerous. I didn't understand what he was asking. It sounded like a threat. But why would he threaten Ryan? Pepper grabbed my hand and led me away. I followed her readily, hoping for answers. What's wrong with Ryan? What was that black stuff on the rope? I asked. How did you find me, anyway? She answered my last question first. When you sent me that text saying where you were, what town you were in. Well, let's just say we know all about the people who live here. I'm sorry, I would have responded to your text, but I worried that if they saw your messages and learned we were coming, they'd take precautions. We traced your cell phone to that motel, and found Ryan there. I knew they must have taken you here, and what they were planning. What were they planning? She sighed. Casey, the people who kidnapped you were a cult of demon worshippers. Their demon, or their god, must be bound to a human host in order to stay in this world. I knew the current host was getting old, which is why I was concerned when you told me you were in this town. Do you know why they chose you? I shook my head. Do you know what a beacon is? Oh, they called me a beacon. And even before that, I met this old woman who used that term. I was intrigued. What does it mean? It's a long story, Pepper said. I'll have to tell you another time. But Calvin and I have been suspecting that you might be one for a while now. It would explain a lot. She looked back over to where Ryan and Calvin were. Calvin was still speaking to Ryan in a low, hushed voice. I couldn't make out the words. What did they do to Ryan? I whispered. That rope over there was an important part of the ritual. That old man was once a beacon, just like you, and they used his body to harbor their demon. Until he got too old, that is. That's where you came in. When they killed the old man, the demon's essence was supposed to travel through the rope and into you. The air around me seemed to drop a few degrees. I shuddered and said, It never got to me. It got to Ryan. Pepper nodded grimly. Are you saying there's a demon in Ryan? Like possessing him? I think so, yes. I bit my lip nervously. This was no time to panic. I had to be strong. What do we do? How do we get it out? Pepper hesitated before saying, The reason they use a beacon as the host is that it draws the energy in, attracting it like a magnet. There are no defenses, so the demon completely takes over. The human host, the soul, is gone. Gone. The word hit me like a ton of bricks. But Ryan's not a beacon. True. But I don't know how strong his defenses are. I don't know if he's still in there, or if he is, how long he can last. At that moment, I looked back towards the clearing and saw Calvin get to his feet. Ryan was curled up on the ground. I could see his eyes, reflecting the dancing light of the fire. He was watching Calvin, No, he was watching me. Calvin approached, his expression bleak. How bad? Pepper asked. Calvin shook his head. Bad. He uneasily ran his fingers through his hair and asked, Did you tell Casey? I chimed in. Yes, I know about the demon. I tried to convince it to leave willingly. It knows what will happen if it refuses, but that wasn't enough to persuade it. Or maybe it can't leave. It's weak now, but not for long. Then we need to act now. I was restless. I could feel the seconds ticking by. Calvin echoed my thoughts. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it will become. We have to take care of it while we still can. I nodded earnestly. Okay. Are you prepared for this, Casey? Calvin was more serious than I'd ever seen him, and that was saying something. Of course. You said yourself, there's no time to waste. Calvin shot me an unfathomable glance before turning to Pepper. Are you ready? We don't have much time. Pepper nodded. I asked Calvin, What can I do? Pepper answered instead, You should stay right here, sweetie. You don't need to be a part of this. That was understandable. I'd had a rough night, to say the least, so I wasn't too keen on witnessing an exorcism, or whatever it was they had planned. At least they had something planned. I just wanted Ryan to be alright, for this whole night to end. I felt waves of guilt wash over me. If it weren't for me, he wouldn't be in this kind of trouble in the first place. Calvin bent down to pick something up from the ground. I saw a glint of metal, and realized he'd grabbed his gun. I hadn't realized he'd dropped it, and now seeing him holding it without the cult in sight made me feel uncomfortable. Did he think the cult would return? I turned and saw Pepper holding her gun again as well. Is that really necessary? Pepper saw me eyeing the weapon, and said in a grave voice, I am so sorry, Casey. Why does she look so guilty? Why? I started to ask, and then it hit me. They weren't going to save Ryan. They were going to kill him. I felt like I'd been plunged into an icy river. My ears were ringing, and I couldn't focus, couldn't catch my breath. No, not that. There has to be another way. Pepper looked at me with pity. Oh, Casey, honey. I couldn't speak. My whole body shook, and I was gasping for air. Pepper set down her gun again and pulled me into her arms. Sure. It's okay, she crooned. I know it's hard, but there's no other choice. There's just no time. I tried to push her away, but she held me tighter. I am so sorry you have to go through this. Through my tears, I saw Calvin continue on without Pepper. He reached Ryan and grabbed him by the arm, hoisting him upright. Ryan struggled, but I could see he was weak and fragile, just like Calvin had said. Ryan looked back in my direction and our eyes met. That's not a demon looking back at me, I know it. I didn't doubt Pepper and Calvin that he'd been possessed, but I was certain that Ryan was still in there. He had to be. There was no mistaking the fear I saw in his eyes as Calvin shoved him roughly towards the tree line. At that moment, I decided I didn't care if there was a demon in that body. That was my Ryan, who hadn't given up on me yet, even when he had every reason to. As long as there was a glimmer of hope that he could be saved, I wasn't giving up on him either. Not without a fight. I shoved Pepper as hard as I could. She lost her balance and fell backwards, landing hard in the dirt. Before she could react, I was racing across the clearing towards Ryan. Pepper shouted after me, but it was too late. Calvin didn't have time to turn around before I'd slammed into his back, sending him sprawling across the ground, his gun sailing into the darkness. Ryan stumbled, but I caught his arm and coaxed him on, into the trees. In no time, we were out of sight of the clearing. I tried to convince myself that it was Ryan, not a demon, who leaned unsteadily against me, tripping over rocks and roots as we plowed through the brush. Soon I was out of breath, and Ryan wasn't doing too well either, so we ducked behind a fallen log. I strained my ears, listening for the sounds of pursuit. It was quiet. The moon was big and bright, but the woods still looked ominous and impossibly deep. I heard Ryan's slow, steady breathing to my right, and turned to face him. My pulse quickened as I met his gaze. His eyes glinted in the moonlight, and there was something off about his expression. It looked hungry. No, that wasn't quite right. It was predatory. The way an eagle watches a field mouse, impassive and calculating. That's how Ryan looked at me. The crackling of dry leaves grabbed my attention. It sounded like footsteps, and they were close. I held my breath and tried to make myself as small as possible behind the rotted log. The smell of old wood and moss seeped down my throat as I tried to disappear into the forest floor. Ryan stayed where he was, barely hidden by the log, and he didn't take his eyes off me. The footsteps grew nearer. I was too scared to peer over the log, so I shut my eyes and listened. My nerves calmed as the footsteps faded away into the forest. I let my breath out in a rush, not realizing how loud it was in the dead silent forest. A whimper escaped my lips. The rustle of footsteps stopped, and then turned into a roar. Whoever had just passed by us was coming back, crashing at full speed through the underbrush. I had no time to think. "Run!" I shouted, not only at Ryan but at myself too. I took off full speed through the trees, ducking under branches and clearing sharp rocks jutting up from the earth. I could hear Ryan behind me, hot on my heels. I thought I'd have to run all night to shake our pursuer, especially because the noise we were making made us an easy target. But after a few minutes, I realized the only noises I could hear were my own. My stomach dropped when I realized what that meant. I'd lost our follower, luckily, but I'd lost Ryan too. I didn't even know what direction the clearing was, let alone the road. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Ryan?" I whispered. There was no response but the leaves rustling in the trees. No, wait, what was that sound in the distance? There was a scuffling noise, and then a scream in the darkness. That wasn't Ryan, was it? I whipped my head around, trying to peer into the heavy shadows. "Ryan!" I said a little louder. Then I froze. Before me, just beyond the nearest clump of trees, was a person. Its back was to me. I clapped my hands over my mouth, hoping it hadn't heard me. But it was so close. The figure turned, and as it did, I realized how small it was. It was a child, a little girl. My knees quaked as I recognized her. She'd been among the cult members during the ritual. I wondered why she was all alone out here in the woods, and decided she must have run away when Calvin and Pepper showed up carrying guns. I didn't blame her. I'd be scared too. Against my better judgment, I extended a hand to her and stepped forward. The girl saw me and said, "He told me to wait right here." My lips formed the word, "Who?" but no sound came out. In seconds I got my answer anyway. The tall man, the ringleader from the demonic ceremony, stepped out of the shadows behind the little girl. With triumph and malice in his voice, he stalked towards me and said, "I found you." My knees locked. I couldn't move as the tall man advanced closer. Where was Ryan? Where were Pepper and Calvin? Hadn't they followed us into the woods? I couldn't decide whether to scream or not. It could bring help, but it could also attract more of the cult. But help came anyway. Just as the tall man reached where I stood, a blur raced out of the trees. I shut my eyes in fright, and heard a sickening thud. When I opened my eyes again, Ryan was standing in front of me, a rock in hand. I noticed a spray of blood on the rock, even before I saw the tall man slumped on the ground, streams of red running down his face. The girl screamed. Ryan turned towards her, lifting the rock slightly. Instinctively, I dove at the girl and clamped my hands over her mouth. The girl struggled against me, kicking my legs and trying to twist my hand around so she could bite it. Ryan's eyes narrowed into that same predatory glare that I'd seen earlier. He already seemed much stronger than he'd been only minutes ago. "The girl can go," I said. I wanted to sound tough, but my voice wavered. My hands loosened, and the girl took that opportunity to free herself and dash into the trees. Ryan took one step after her. "I said she can go." She was just a child, after all. Even if she was part of some insane cult. Ryan finally dropped the rock, and I could see his face clearly in the bright light of the moon. It looked just like my boyfriend, and yet something was so wrong. When he came to my rescue in the clearing, he'd been my white knight, my hero. Now there was a heavy darkness emanating from him. "Ryan?" I whispered. "Is that you?" He waited some long, painful seconds, a smile playing on his lips, before answering. "No. I wasn't expecting that." I knew deep down that it wasn't Ryan looking at me with those eyes, but I expected the demon, to lie. The honesty threw me. I might as well take advantage of it, I thought. "Then who am I speaking to? Are you a demon?" Ryan's smile widened. It pained me to see that. It looked like a mockery of his usual, happy grin. "If you want to call it that." "They did." Another unexpected answer. Interesting. I was also thrown by the fact that he spoke just like Ryan did. No demonic, raspy voice, no ancient language. Studying him closer, I realized his shirt was torn and dirty, like he'd been in a fight. I remembered the scream I'd heard earlier. "What happened back there, when you disappeared? Did you hurt someone? Did you hurt Pepper or Calvin?" "No. Not one of them. Someone else." I finished the response in my head. I felt queasy. At least Pepper and Calvin were okay. As furious as I was, I still didn't want them hurt, or worse. I steadied myself and asked the question I'd been dreading. Is Ryan still alive? Was that the right word for it?" The smile vanished. Ryan, well, the demon, looked unsure. "That's not easily answered, yes or no." I tried to sound confident, but my voice cracked and I choked back a sob. Was it just my imagination, or did a look of sympathy flicker across Ryan's face? If it did, it was gone now. "Yes. Yes. Ryan's alive." I thought I'd feel relief, but I found myself doubting the demon's honesty. Now, of course it would tell me Ryan was alive, even if he wasn't. I still clung to that scrap of hope. It meant there might be a chance to make everything right again. I heard a rustling nearby. It could have been an animal, but I didn't want to risk it. We needed to get out of there, and fast, but I had one more question. "What do you want?" Ryan looked taken aback. His brow furrowed, and he repeated the question. "What do I want?" I waited. Ryan stared down at his hands, raising them slowly like they'd been shackled with heavy chains. He finally said, "I want what you want." I shook my head in confusion. "I don't think so. I just want Ryan back. I want you gone. And I want to be free," the demon said. He dropped Ryan's hands, and said, "Help me get what I want, and you'll get your Ryan back." The wind whipped through the trees, and above me, the moon vanished behind the clouds, taking all sense of security with it. I hesitated only a fraction of a second before answering. "I'll do whatever it takes." "So that's the deal. That's what I need to do now for Ryan?" We made it out of the woods that night and snuck into an empty house, safe from prying eyes. The next day we borrowed someone's car and hightailed it out of that town, away from the cult that had imprisoned the demon for centuries, and away from Pepper and Calvin, who would no doubt be searching for us. I don't know what's in store for us, but I'll tear through everything in my path until I get what I want. I don't think it's safe to post here anymore. Not while people are after us, tracking our every move. I'll keep writing though, getting down every detail, every story, and someday I'll tell you everything. I promise.